You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. Today we'll have two special guests, Catherine Kramer and Darren Cosgrove. Catherine Kramer is a Ph.D. candidate in the School of Social Welfare. Catherine's research takes her across multiple settings, educational, juvenile, and child welfare, in pursuit of organizational and community designs and practices that ensure healthy development and opportunity for young people. Her dissertation is focused on peer relationships about trauma-impacted youth. She is a research associate with the National Center for Youth Opportunity and Justice and a research assistant with an education equity-focused project, New York Kids, based in the School of Education. She is a licensed master social worker and holds a master's degree in public administration. Darren Cosgrove is also a Ph.D. candidate in the School of Social Welfare. His dissertation focuses on the use of arts-based participatory action research with non-binary youth adults. Like his research, Darren's clinical work has focused on sexuality, gender, and working with LGBTQAI individuals and families. Prior to pursuing his doctorate, Darren spent 13 years working on youth-led sexuality education and reproductive justice initiatives. In addition to being a practicing licensed master social worker, Darren also works at the University of Albany's Center for Human Service Research, where he is part of a team evaluating high-fidelity wraparound and integration with health homes for New York State and their families. I'm so excited to have Darren and Catherine with us today. And stay tuned because they'll be joined with us after the break.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome back to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. And again, we have Catherine Kramer and Darren Cosgrove, both Ph.D. candidates in the School of Social Welfare. They'll be facilitating two complementary workshops focused on working with youth. The first, titled Advancing Adolescent Identity Formation and Agency, Lessons from Positive Youth Development for Practitioners, is scheduled for February 8th, 2018. The second is titled Youth Leadership for Organizational and Community Transformation, and that is scheduled for March 15th. Both are offered through the University at Albany's Continuing Education Program and run from 1 to 4 p.m. We'll have more information about how to register for those at the end of the segment. So welcome, Catherine and Darren.
Thanks for having us.
So can you just start off briefly by sharing what each workshop is about?
Sure. So I'll start off by talking about the one that's scheduled for February 8th. And that's the one that's on positive youth development. So our kind of intention with that one is to really explore positive youth development and this idea that young people need certain things in their life in order to develop in healthy ways, any young person. So they need like a caring adult, they need opportunities for leadership, they need opportunities to develop skills and mastery of those skills and be able to demonstrate them. And so Darren and I kind of got the idea to do some of this because we felt like sometimes that idea of development is lost in social work practice, that it becomes a lot about, the issues, maybe they're suffering, from a mental health issue or they have some other kind of complicating issue in their life. And a lot of the times the practice then focuses on that versus thinking about this young person kind of in a more global and macro sense and thinking about the ways and what they need in their life to kind of feel accomplished and to feel good about themselves. So in that workshop, we're actually going to be kind of looking at how do you infuse positive youth development principles into your agency or organization and your practice as a social worker or other mental health practitioner.
That's
cool.
I'm really excited. I just realized I said the workshop was 2018. It's going to be 2019.
2019.
I know. Oh.
We'll also be designing time machines to be
right.
exact to 2018. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about our second workshop. And again, this is the one that will be taking place on March 15th, focusing on youth leadership for organizational and community transformation. And Alyssa, as you said, these workshops are designed to be complementary. So folks can come to one or the other, but they do have an overlap in some of the material, and we design them thinking about how the content from one could complement the other one. So the second one is really taking the idea of positive youth development along with principles from participatory action research and youth participatory action research, and looking at how those principles, some activities embedded in doing participatory action research or youth-led programming, can be used to both promote agency change and community transformation, and really looking at the way that young people can be active leaders in transformative work, both in their lives and the lives of their peers. And it's similar to what Catherine was saying, really looking at the ways in which sometimes youth are underutilized or underappreciated, and examining the ways in which their power and agency can create positive change, both on a personal agency and community level.
Now, when we talk about youth and enhancing their voice, why is this relevant to social work? Why should we, as clinicians, really focus more on giving the youth this power to speak up and share their stories? And
Sure. So, one of the things that Darren and I really had noticed is that a lot of times young people are portrayed in this kind of deficit framework. So especially, if you think back to your social work practice skills when we're learning about adolescence, we learn about all the risk factors, we learn about all of the potential problems that can come about, whether it's substance abuse or risky sexual behavior or kind of engaging in cutting school. We think a lot of times, I think, in a way that really pathologizes young people and sees them as a collection of problems that we need to kind of buffer and manage and help them through. And so Darren and I, we really wanted to inject this into a social work kind of practice audience, because we thought it was a good reminder of, the ways in which professionals might be having a very narrow, especially social work professionals, but also others might be having a very narrow view of young people as this collection of problems, rather than seeing them as people who are very capable, who have strengths, who have the ability to do things for themselves and make, good choices, and to really contribute to their community in a way which we know is also can be deeply meaningful to them as well.
And I think that idea of youth-centered or kind of youth empowering, youth-led work being transformative for that young person is in and of itself relevant to social work, but also the ways in which young people can be transformative and social change leaders, not only in their lives, but in the lives of other young folks, of the experiences of their communities, is also relevant to social work. The idea or the thinking about the ways in which young people can be a source of identifying problems that they themselves see that seem most relevant to their daily lives, as well as the tools and resources that they identify as strategies and strengths, both personally and community-based. There's significant power in young people identifying those themselves, rather than outsiders kind of looking in, or adults looking in and trying to define what those problem strategies and strengths might be. And so our workshops are also going to be looking at the ways in which young people as a source of or young people positioned to be able to identify resources, challenges, and opportunities presents the opportunity to gain knowledge and perspective that we might not otherwise have access to. And so, again, this complementary view that we're hoping folks who attend these workshops find ways to engage in work that's both beneficial, as Catherine was describing, to the individual young person, but also the ways in which young people can really be leaders in broader transformation.
Well, it seems like such an important topic. And I remember when I was interning, I was working with foster care, and they used to say, like, if if you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it, and they'll tell it wrong. And how do we have how are youth able to get their voice out, be heard, say what they need, say what their strengths are, without someone sort of saying like, well, here's weaknesses, here's a risk factor for you. So there seems to be
I was going to add one thing too, and I was going to say that, we've been talking about how social work practitioners and other allied professions might be seeing young people, but it's also it's a cultural phenomenon too, how we see young people as well, that it's not just a professional lens, it's also kind of this idea, like they call it adultism, that adults, well, we know better than you, you're hormonal, you're not able to think for yourself, that's really kind of culturally pretty pervasive. And if you really stop and look at, I think that's one of the interesting things, if you look at how youth are portrayed in the media or in television shows and in books, a lot of times it can be fairly negative. They can be seen as they're erratic. There's this kind of like eye roll on the behalf of adults, right? Because like, oh, well, the problems of youth, especially adolescents, we think of them as just ornery and like difficult to deal with. And I think that's, unfortunately fairly kind of common belief among adults, even ones that are maybe not that much older than, some of the young people that they're working with. So I think it's, I think there's social work, the ways that social work practice has kind of shunted us into maybe seeing people through a deficit framework, and then also just kind of this cultural issue of how we view young people, and not always in, really empowering or kind of supportive, strengths-based way. So that's something that we hope, like in these workshops too, that we're able to kind of tease out and really start having people think about what are their assumptions about young people. Can they come up with strengths? Like I was in a training with law enforcement officers, and it was focused on adolescents, and we said, describe adolescence. It was exclusively negative, and even with prodding, we're like, well, what's a strength you could share with us? What's a strength of young people? And they're like, well, you don't have to work. And it's like, well, that's not really, that's something that happens at that period of time. Like, yes, you're in school, you're not working, but like they struggle to kind of say something positive. So I don't think it's unique to just social workers. I think it's everywhere in the way that kind of culturally we look at that. So.
We used to do this activity where we had like the popsicle sticks, and you might know this. And when you talk about youth identifying their own strengths, they can break if they only have one or two. You take the popsicle sticks and they break in half. But when you can identify more strengths and you stack up those popsicle sticks, it's harder to break. And it just seems like there's so many benefits for youth as the more strengths that they can develop, the more they feel empowered, that they have a stronger base. That it's easier it's harder, I should say, to break than addressing some of those risk factors and some of the things. So what are the benefits to agencies and community through these workshops? I mean, we know the benefits of youth. How can these agencies benefit from this type of model?
Well,
go ahead.
So
Darren and I will both jump in on this one, but go ahead.
So Catherine mentioned the framework that we're basing a lot of this off from is positive youth development, but we're also incorporating a lot of the lessons learned that we've learned, both as practitioners working with young people, but also as scholars and researchers engaged in youth participatory action research. And for listeners who may not be familiar, participatory action research is a very broad methodology that centers folks who might otherwise be considered research subjects or research participants as co-leaders and co-researchers in the design of a study, in the collection of data, in the analysis of that data, and in the dissemination of findings. And so there's a series, just the act of engaging in that can be a affirming or empowering experience. But similar to what we discussed earlier, it also provides the opportunity for new and relevant knowledge to be identified and to be shared. And so while our workshops are not going to be focused on training practitioners to be researchers, there's a lot of wisdom and opportunity that I think we can learn from those approaches to research, just in the generation of knowledge or information that's relevant to an agency. involving young people in the design of needs assessments or of service and program evaluation? Are we looking at things from a perspective that's relevant to young people? And what is the benefit to having young people involved in helping identify what we should be looking at and getting that information? I think there's something very different happens when I, as an adult, as a licensed social worker, sits down with somebody as great of a social worker as I might think I am. Me sitting down with a young person and asking them about their experience produces a different outcome, an important outcome, but a certainly different outcome and different information than a young person with a shared experience or a similar experience sitting down with that same individual and having a conversation around what's working, what's not, what could be improved, those types of things.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really see it as there's a very, so there's the practical benefits to the young people, but there's really, what Darren's talking about, there's some really tangible benefits that can come to agencies if you're actually, providing your services, designing services in a way that actually makes sense to a young person. There's the challenges are certainly very deep. And so I think that when we don't consult those who we're trying to benefit with them, there could be problems there. And I think that with young people, because of some of the things that Darren and I have talked about already, the fact that they're, given their age and this kind of cultural idea about young people, that they tend to be the least engaged in, well, what do you think about your treatment or about the services or the issues that we have here? And I think that's a real missed opportunity where agencies could actually be providing services in such a way that are going to be much more impactful, which I think at the end of the day is really what every agency is trying to do. So that's our hope.
And I think, finally on that is also, we're talking about the benefits and what's gained in taking this type of approach to working with young folks. But I also think that there's consequences to not. And I'm not assuming a cookie cutter uniform approach that everybody can take, but when we don't work with young people in ways that truly and honestly, not in a tokenistic way, but genuinely engage young people as leaders, when we don't do that, what type of culture or perspective or perception of youth do we perpetuate?
Yeah.
And I think that we also want to encourage folks to abandon this sort of adultist and pathologizing way of looking at young people.
And I think some people, it'd be interesting, so my dissertation's kind of looking at this issue of kind of how young people see their peer relationships versus how practitioners view peer relationships. And one of the things in my pilot study that I started to tease out is that practitioners, the adults, actually have some views that they don't realize, that they weren't aware of kind of how young people saw things, that they weren't even aware what they weren't aware of, almost being the issue that I think I'm in touch with kind of what this young person wants, but really having a space where young people were communicating things. They had saw the importance of these peer relationships as very important in their lives, where the practitioners tended to think, oh, the work is happening in my office. This is where the important stuff is happening. The young person's that's nice, but it's also great, these relationships I might have with some of my peers here that I really rely on, some of the other people that I'm, in residence with is supports in my life too. So I think there's even this kind of, do you even know, do you even have an awareness of, maybe you might think that you do, but do you? So I think one of the things we hope to kind of bring out is having people start to question that and start to kind of unlock those mental models that they might have, and not even kind of implicit assumptions that they might not even realize that they're making, which we all do it. This is not like a finger wagging exercise, but we all do it. And it's not until we have those opportunities to have somebody show us something different that I think they stay that way. So I hope that's, one of the things we're able to accomplish with this.
Well, just listening to you guys, it seems like you have not only the experience, but a passion for bringing this to the public, to really having other people engage with what you're doing and understand the importance of it. So why did you put these workshops together? Is it just your passion for this? You're wanting to share your research, your knowledge? What was the inspiration for this?
Yeah, I think it's probably all of the above, what you just said. But I think one of the things that Darren and I realized in having conversations with each other is how much we benefited from experiences that were really positive youth development aligned as a young person. Like I had shared with Darren, and I didn't even think of it this way, honestly, until I started, I kind of had my interest in this and doing my research and studying and reading around it. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, I was actually a beneficiary of that when I was a young person and kind of didn't think of it that way. But I got the opportunity in my high school. They had a really robust community service program. I got tremendous amounts of opportunity to do wonderful things in high school. They had a program where you would organize a group of high school kids. They would be matched with an elderly person in the community. They would call them every day, have a quick conversation. If they didn't get a hold of them, there was a protocol you would follow. There was actually incidences where someone couldn't get a hold of their person and they actually found out that person fell. So there was real tangible things, and there was also just the kind of social, emotional support that came from that. A lot of the older people were isolated. So those were opportunities that I had. And they even had something that was wonderful where there was a structure that was kind of run by adults, but once you were in the program, you could then progress to be a peer leader. And I know that was something that was really, really important to me when I was like a junior in high school, was doing that work, and getting other opportunities like that. And it's funny, I hadn't revisited that time in my life until just recently through these conversations with Darren and realizing how much that has influenced where I am today. But it was kind of this thing, and then I moved on to college, and then looking back, I'm like, oh wow, that's so much of, what influenced me and where I am today, that is so connected to the work that I'm doing now. And just realizing how important that felt for me, especially for me in high school. I know I did really well in English and social studies. Math was always like, I'm just trying to get myself through it. So like having these opportunities to be like, oh no, I'm really good at this. I'm really good at talking to people. I'm really good at getting out in the community and making connections. That was really valuable as a kind of building my identity and my self-confidence. So I think, this kind of marrying together some, for me at least, these experiences I realized I had as a young person with then experiences I had as a practitioner working with young people, and seeing how the tendency to look at them very narrowly and to think of them as a collection of these disorders we thought they had, of these risk factors we thought they had, and how that was deeply dehumanizing and ultimately not that helpful. And I found sometimes in my practice with adolescents as a social worker that the best thing I could do for a kid was take them out for a walk and just do something that was completely normal instead of sitting in an office. So I think all of that, for me was really motivating.
And similarly for me, I as a teenager sort of stumbled unexpectedly into a peer education program that offered peer-to-peer sexuality education, and used theater as an educational tool, engaged in kind of community advocacy, some political advocacy work, and it was just a transformative experience, both content-wise, relevant content for me as a young person, really interesting and meaningful content that I don't think I had realized I was searching for as a young person, but also the way in which the program was designed. We had great adult facilitation, but it was a group that was really led by the young people. We designed the theater interventions, the educational interventions we were going to use. We identified the problems that we wanted to tackle, the resources we wanted to utilize. We problem solved both intergroup challenges as well as community challenges. It was just an incredibly transformative experience for me personally. And similar to Catherine's program, there was opportunities for me as I aged out of that group to move into a position of being a group facilitator. So I then had the privilege and opportunity to be the adult in that group that, the person previously in that role had such a tremendous impact on me, and continued for 13 years to work with adolescent members of that group and continue that sort of tradition of that program, which has entirely shaped my work as a social worker, has informed how I conduct the research that I currently do, the participatory action research that I'm involved in. And it's just, it was the group was not something I was expecting and just fell into, but immediately offered me both content and process that was incredibly relevant. And I see it as my responsibility to make that available to folks who choose to use it. And again, we're not assuming everybody wants to, or that this model fits, but we know that it has significant power.
Well, I'm really excited about it. I'm hoping to attend it. So just a reminder to our listeners, the first workshop is February 8th, 2019, Advancing Adolescent Identity, Formation, and Agency, Lessons from Positive Youth Development for Practitioners. And the second one is March 15th, Youth Leadership for Organizational and Community Transformation. They're both part of the University of Albany's Continuing Education Program, which you can go on our website, www.albany.edu/SSW, and there's a link to the Continuing Education page. And Catherine and Darren, as we wrap up, if there are individuals who might want to learn more but cannot attend the workshop, what is the best way for them to find out more information about your work, what they can do at their agency, or how they can work with youth?
Sure. I mean, they could contact us individually. So my email address is ckramer, Kramer, @albany.edu. And then
similarly, email is certainly fine on my end, and happy to share that. That's D Cosgrove, Cosgrove, also at albany.edu.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we, like I said, I hope to attend this workshop. Is there anything as we finish up that you'd like to leave our listeners, or should they just say, come to the workshop and you'll find out some more?
The only thing I would say, and after us talking now for I don't even know how long, and then listening to Darren, that really I think a lot of this boils down to youth want to feel like they matter and that they can do something important and purposeful. And that's really, I think, exactly what you were describing as your experience when you were a young person. And that's, exactly what we intend to try and communicate in this workshop, and how to try and go about doing that.
And I think that folks who do come to the workshops will certainly be providing some background and models and frameworks to think about, but also it will be both of them will be very hands-on, and we'll be practicing tools and activities that we're hoping folks are able to then bring back to their agencies.
Well, yes. I know you both are awesome.
We like to get people talking, so we plan to do that.
Yeah. Well, you guys are awesome presenters. I've attended workshops by both of you, and I'm very excited for these coming up in the spring. Again, this is the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore, and today we were with Catherine Kramer and Darren Cosgrove, both Ph.D. candidates in the School of Social Welfare. Thanks so much.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.